Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning and spending some time with us. I hope you find it beneficial. As Jessica said, my name is David Wilson. I'm the VP of Managed Services here at DataVox. And with me, I'm very pleased to have Charles Hatcher and John Perifelice from Sophos. Morning, gentlemen. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well. Thank you, David.
Great, David. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Before we start, I have one very important question for both of you guys. Is it Sophos or Sophos?
Sophos is the correct. That's the correct pronunciation.
I've been singing it along all these years. Okay, is it okay if I just stick with Sophos because I'm used to that?
I say you're fine. You're good.
Yep. I say Sophos. It all depends on what part of the globe you're from, really, and how you pronounce your O's.
Well, I've heard both. I'll stick with Sophos. But I appreciate you being here today. I think MDR is definitely one of the hottest topic that we hear about in the cybersecurity landscape at the moment. Seems to be everywhere I look, it's MDR. All the vendors have some kind of flavor of MDR. I did read a Gartner report this week that said by 2025, which is pretty close, 50% of the US companies will be deploying some flavor of MDR. So obviously a very hot topic and can be a confusing one. So I'm pleased to have you guys here to help us understand a bit more about MDR and particularly some of the integrations that Sophos MDR has. So thanks for your time this morning, gents. Before we jump into that, I wanted to tell everyone a little bit about DataVox. I know looking at the attendee list, we have a mixture of some existing customers and some new names. So not everyone might be familiar with DataVox, but we're a local Houston company, been around for 30 plus years. Some of you that live in Houston might have seen our building. We're on the west side of town on the Beltway and Bel Air. Got about 300 employees, also an office in Arlington, and customers all over Texas and really the US as well. So for the next slide, this really tells you a little bit about all the things we do now. We started off as a phone system company, and now you'll see the other areas of technology that we're involved in. We really like to think of ourselves as a one-stop shop for all your technology needs. And if you haven't done so, I would encourage you to go to our website, datavox.net. We have spent a lot of time upgrading that recently, and there really is a whole wealth of information on all the different products and services that we offer. So I would encourage you to go there. This next slide tells you a little bit about our MIT offering. We've been selling IT for 30 years, but really only the last maybe 4 or 5 years, we've had a formal MIT managed services offering that we offer our clients. So you'll see here, this includes remote help desk support, patching, obviously monitoring of all your devices, and of course, cybersecurity. Really, the first thing we looked at when we looked at MIT was cybersecurity, and we evaluated all the different vendors out there and decided that Sophos was the partner that fitted best for us and our customers. So we started with Sophos Endpoint Security, and then over the years upgraded to MTR. And now this year, all our customers have Sophos MDR complete, included with their MIT offering. So everyone has that as part of their basic package. So with that, John, I'd hand it over to you and tell us a little bit more about MDR.
Yeah, I think this is an important topic. As you said, it's becoming more prevalent in every conversation that we have. But in all reality, when we look at the big picture here, cyber insurance is becoming more strict on their questionnaires, requiring certain features, monitoring, response, etc. So maintaining that relationship with a healthy insurance is a struggle sometimes. We want MDR to help facilitate some areas there. Just a struggling security team. Everyone's doing the best they can, but having a legitimate monitoring service that can take action is so critical. And to your point, there's tons of MDRs, and I think from an education standpoint, let's start with just the high level. Let's make sure we paint the picture for what MDR actually is and why it's here. And then my objective is, as we work through this, I really want to educate on what Sophos is doing within the MDR landscape, because we're really trying to create one of the most holistic MDRs that we could possibly imagine, and I think you'll see that towards the end. So let's start with the basics. MDR, for those of you who aren't familiar, means managed detection and response. So if we actually go back in time just a little bit, antivirus was traditionally the requirement. It was the necessary. You had to have antivirus on your machines. And what people started to realize was if you don't have better and more sophisticated tools than the threat actors who are trying to attack you, you'll fall behind. So EDR actually, became a very popular acronym about 10 to 15 years ago. It was endpoint detection and response. This was that next evolution where people could take over their antivirus tools and start to become threat hunters in essence. And as we saw the evolution of this, it really did equip a lot of security teams to be able to fight off these adversaries. But what we found, especially when COVID happened, was a lot of budgets were cut and a lot of teams didn't have the headcount and the expertise to manage this themselves. This is where we ended up with MDRs. Everybody started to need a little bit of assistance in the coverage and the gaps of the areas that they knew that they were lacking in. And what we really found these areas are people, process, and technology. From a people standpoint, this is very simple. A lot of people just don't have the ability to hire 10, 20, 30-man teams to be able to go in and actually run their cybersecurity infrastructure. It's just a very big challenge, not only to find people who are wanting to work, but in all reality, maintaining a team that's going to stick with you and not jump over to the next opportunity. So we wanted to bolster that. But when you look at the process flow of things, it's very easy for someone to say, hey, I can do this myself. I've got a team of 4. We're going to manage this. But when you go through and actually look at well, I need to make sure that I know how to identify the risk. I need to make sure I can collect the data appropriately, how to parse through the information correctly, how to read between the lines and understand if there's truly a risk or if it's a false positive, how to handle actioning risk if it's actually found. This is why obviously the DataVox team has partnered with us, is because we really wanted to strengthen that relationship and work together to provide that adequate process flow to know exactly what to do from A to B. And then from a technology standpoint, one of the things that we really focused on as of late was making sure that we could assist in the technology that is traditionally being used that might not be a Sophos tool. We have to recognize that there are other people out there that aren't going to be on a Sophos firewall all the time, but their firewall information is so valuable from a SOC perspective to collect. They might be running something like a proof point for an email security instead of our gateway. We still want to be able to collect that data. And this is why when we talk about third-party telemetry, we have the ability to collect such a large amount of data. But what's so important about the data that we can collect is all of these boxes you see on your screen, from firewall to email to identity to network. These are all collectors that we have custom built here at Sophos in order to capture this data. So rather than taking a traditional SIM or syslog approach, where sometimes you could slow down the collection of data, a lot of times you have to use their static rules to escalate behavior. You can't customize or tweak the platform. This gives us the ability to ensure that every single integration that we build is built off of our logic and our ability to control and manipulate the data in the best way possible for threat hunting. Now, there is obviously, the unique advantage at the top. We offer a wide variety of tools here at Sophos, and whatever flavor you go with, whatever tools you use, we wanted to be able to provide the ability for us to help work with DataVox and manage those tools in a much better capacity, being able to legitimately watch for them 24/7, to look for the true risk, and then to be able to respond to that risk on your behalf no matter what time of day. That's the goal. So this is a wide variety of information that we now get to collect, and it really does create a very unique offering for us. From a high level, because I think it's important to understand what we want to do with this data. So tons of information on the left: identity, cloud, firewall. We have all of these different attack surfaces that we want to ingest information from. That all gets trickled into the Sophos data lake. And number one, from an event correlation standpoint, it's so important to have all of your data in one repo. So our data lake creates that opportunity for that to be done. But when you go through and you look at things, when we talk about impossible logon or geographical inconsistencies, when we look at specific traffic on devices on the network that might not have antivirus deployed, this is what we wanted to do with bringing in all of this data, is to piece together a better attack. And I know you have all seen a funnel like this before in your world. This is really critical because all of the raw events that we collect from the data that's sent to us, whether it's Sophos tools or not, We want all of those events because we have to be able to see everything that the vendor is firing against and understand how they score it and what severity level they give it. We get to extract all of that information and then apply our logic. Maybe Palo Alto sees a specific buffer overflow attack as a 4, but for us, maybe that's a 6 or a 7. So we get to augment that. And what we do is the detections right below the events, we customize what a detection is because we have our own detection engineering team that helps us look at all of these different pieces of activity and events, and we get to bubble things up to the top and create new detections based off of what we feel and know is relevant in the threat world. So you might have your endpoint agent blocking bad activity. We're going to go out and we're going to collect all of this other information on your endpoints, like processes that are running and IP connections and users signing on. We're going to collect all of these raw logs and pool them together and make sure we elevate the activity that needs to be sent to the SOC via a case. Once we have a case, we immediately have a team of humans that start the process of investigation. This is an important part because when we talked earlier on about tons of different MDR flavors that are out there, one of the things that I absolutely love about our service is there is always a human that is working our cases. So when you do start to get into maybe some more managed SIM-based MDRs where you're just sending data to a repo and it's spitting out detections, a lot of times they're relying on that AI engine to be able to escalate bad activity. And a lot of times there's false positive mixed in with that unless you go out and investigate. It can create a lot of overhead. So every single time we have a case, a human is always investigating it. A human will escalate to the point of if there is something more concerning, and then we're prepared with our MDR Complete service that obviously DataVox is getting all of their users on. This MDR Complete gives us full-scale unlimited incident response. So anytime that we find an active threat, our team can jump in immediately and start responding. And when we talk about immediate, this is really impactful because if you're, recovering from a busy week or you're trying to enjoy, 4th of July or Labor Day coming up and you have to have your phone attached to your hip, what we get to do with DataVox is really not only stop an exponential amount of the known threats that are out there. You got to remember from a Sophos perspective, we have upwards of 550,000 customers on our platform. So we're collecting information from hundreds of thousands of firewalls and 100 million plus endpoints across the globe are sending us all of this valuable information. So the core agent gets to block a lot of the stuff that it knows is bad, but anything else that needs to be investigated further, traditionally speaking, in under an hour, we're identifying this risk and responding to it. So the 38 minutes that you see was actually our response times for the year 2022 on average. So 1 minute to detect, 25 minutes to investigate, and 12 minutes to respond. These were our national averages, global averages, if you will, across all MDR customers to identify risk and respond. And David, I might take a brief pause here and just kind of loop you in because obviously, as you've been getting MDR involved with your customer base more, this level of response and being able to actually go out and fix problems, what kind of reception have you been getting from the users that have been on this? Has it been hugely valuable to help alleviate a lot of that burden?
Absolutely, yeah. The response time from your team has been amazing. I think the peace of mind for the customers, they can sleep a little bit easier. You mentioned, 4th of July and holidays, these things always happen at the wrong time. So having your team looking at everything 24/7, 365 is a great peace of mind for the customers.
Yep.
I think the other thing that our IT team is if we identify something ourselves, we can actually send it to the Sophos team to get them to have a look at it.
Yeah.
For look, and we've done that many times, and often it proves to be nothing, but it's a great resource that we have to utilize as well.
And we don't mind that at all. I'd rather us go look for a rabbit down a rabbit hole and not find one than find a threat actor hiding down below. So this is one of the things where we talk about shared responsibility model and you as a DataVox team helping carry that burden for your end users and you get to be the one who manages that shared responsibility and you get to participate because you typically see things that sometimes can be missed. So that's part of the relationship we want to have 100%.
I was just curious, John, I don't know the answer to this. You mentioned people. How many people do you have looking at this stuff?
Yeah. So overall, from a SOC team perspective, not all of this number is going to be staring at the screen looking at logs, but in all reality, we have upwards of 500 bodies in our cumulative SOC. So we've got data analysts, we've got threat hunters, we have incident response leads that are more prepped and have the expertise to handle active incidents. We've got detection engineers that are designed to obviously pull in all of the information that we get out in the world and create logic for our endpoint agents to either capture the information automatically or go out and look for it. So that way, if we see a customer impacted, we've got people in our labs team that are looking at 400,000 to 500,000 new threat indicators a day and bubbling over to the SOC. Hey, this looks impactful. We're seeing this across a broader customer base. You guys should do a threat hunt against MDR customers to see if this is now a prevalent activity. So we have multiple teams firing off. Everybody helps each other be successful in this game. So, and this is one of the reasons why I love having, a lot of our Sophos tools. It gives us the ability to really capture a lot of risk beyond just the stuff that we're integrating from our customer base with. So when we talk about included integrations, I want to show this screen because this is a really impactful piece is knowing that when you go with a Sophos tool, it's automatically sending data to the SOC. So if you want to work with obviously the DataVox team and say, hey, you know what, maybe we don't necessarily, we're not married to our email gateway, we're not married to our firewall, how can we reduce some spend and get really good outcomes? This is a good opportunity. Sophos offers plenty of tools from endpoint to cloud to email to firewall. That's included and automatically sent to the data lake. So if you own that tool, we collect the data. We actually also included our Microsoft security integration as well, complementary. We know that M365 is becoming a very used tool and service. So we wanted to ensure that anything across the Defender suite, Azure Identity, even the email, so we talk about using Microsoft and Outlook in the cloud, having all of those threat detections come in from the graph security is critical, as well as the management API, being able to look at your users and your admins, monitor for policy modifications and system changes. So as you guys migrate to the cloud, if you haven't already, and you go with that Sophos stack, it's automatically built in. And it's just a really good way to get off the ground and say, hey, at a minimum, I can have my endpoints, my servers, and my Microsoft 365 data all sent to one repository. If you do love using your other tools, we want you to keep them. This is the beauty of how we built our MDR is we want you to feel comfortable using the tools that you guys know and use every single day. So whether you have, third-party firewalls, or you're integrating with a different email vendor, maybe you're starting to get into MFA a little bit more aggressively, so a Duo or a Okta, any of these tools, you'll have the ability to add them to your stack and say, not only do you want our team to ingest the data for the purpose of understanding if there's risk, but this is a really valuable asset when you think about a lot of times the hundreds of, if not thousands of firewall detections that are firing every day, not all of the time are they being watched and monitored and managed. This gives you the ability to make sure someone is keeping an eye on that always, and we're providing very, very valid context and guidance on what should be done to reduce the attack surface on these tools. So,
John, I've got one question coming in here. It might have been on the previous slide. Do you integrate with Microsoft Defender?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we can do, and I can kind of go back to this slide and maybe bust out the trusty pen here. So Defender for Endpoint is something that we absolutely can integrate with. And this is a really cool option because if you have a very big investment in Microsoft and you want to use the Defender product and you want to maintain that relationship, we can overlay with our XDR sensor. It's a very lightweight sensor. It just sits there and collects telemetry. That's it. So you don't have the burden of having an additional antivirus tool on your boxes consuming resources. We can collect the data, and then our XDR sensor can actually go out and provide legitimate response. So when you have the Defender product in place and you overlay with our XDR sensor, you will get access to that detection and response that we can provide. Now, one of the benefits that I will say is if you do go with any of the Sophos MDR tiers, obviously the DataVox team can provide you the guidance on what would be best. When you use a endpoint that is not Sophos, we won't be able to provide that full-scale incident response. So you will have the option in both tiers that we provide. We give you access to both our full endpoint agent and just our sensor. So whether you want to use Defender moving forward completely, or whether you want to say, you know what, I have allotment to this very powerful antivirus tool. Let me deploy that instead, and then I can now have access to the incident response, and now I can have an IR plan ready to go. I can have a team that will jump in and respond to any active threats on my behalf, whether it's unauthorized access or just a minute file that needs to be removed. So you have options. Our objective is we don't want to tell you what to use or not to use. We want to give you access to some of the best tools possible, and then you build the relationship with your SOC that you feel is the most beneficial. And hopefully kind of seeing these tiers here, the MDR complete on the right, that full-scale incident response. Once again, this is not any type of like retainer-driven incident response plan. What we have done for this specific tier here is to ensure that you have access whenever you need it to know exactly how a threat can be handled. That's that full root cause. That's our team. Best way I like to describe it is if you're managing your world, think of an endpoint as an apartment building, and you have hundreds of different rooms inside of this apartment building. These are all of your machines. If for some reason, and maybe this is a perfect time to talk about threat response versus incident response, if for any reason we find rats in room 102, the threat response for those rats is to go to room 102 and to eliminate the rats from that room. So we're going to look for how they got into the room. We're going to set up traps. We're going to plug the baseboards to make sure they can't get back in. We're going to find all of the indicators of compromise. We're going to look for the breadcrumb trails about how they made their way into the room. We're going to get room 102 back into functioning working order. That is threat response at its core, is disrupting and containing an attack. Now, when we talk about incident response and full scale, this is where if you own that building, there's a greater possibility that the rats are not only in room 102, but they might have moved somewhere else. They might be in room 104. They might be in the walls, in the attic. How did they get in? So incident response is bringing in a team to go outside the building and look for how the rats got into the building in the first place, finding true root cause, not just patient zero, but finding how they got in. Then it's scouring through the walls and maybe setting up some bombs to eliminate the threat from inside of the wall. So getting all of the rats out of there, making sure that every room inside the building doesn't have any signs of rats. So it's that full scale approach of making sure that we're not just responding to the threat, but we're ensuring that it's completely eliminated from the estate. And that is exactly the difference between those two tiers, and the relationship that you can have is you get to really pick and choose where do you feel that this partnership with DataVox and Sophos can come in and assist you the best. Do you want that team that can go out and do all of that heavy lifting, or do you feel that you just need a team that can disrupt and you guys will be available to jump in and assist? You get to pick the relationship, which is really nice. Now, I want to highlight a couple other things here, because when we talk about managed detection and response, it's important to understand that Sophos does have some tie-ins to some other capabilities from a service offering. So if you are not an MDR customer of ours and there's ever any concern of an active incident, even if you know somebody out in the world that's in your industry that also has signs of an active incident, we offer a standalone service that can come in and do full disaster recovery efforts to eliminate and neutralize any threat or threat actor that's present. We've actually just achieved, I believe, our 500th disaster recovery engagement as of last week. So over 500 businesses have come to us for help. Every single one of them, we have successfully eradicated that threat and helped them get back to normalcy. If you're on MDR, especially that complete flavor, our goal is you would never need any type of disaster recovery efforts. But we wanted to make sure, maybe you want to go with something that's a little bit different and you still need a team that's ready to jump in case things ever were to change. We're ready. And even from a compromise assessment perspective, if you guys ever need some help, maybe you're buying a new business and you're bringing them under your umbrella, you went through an acquisition and you want to verify that their estate is clean and healthy before you bring them under your umbrella into your network. Even if you're just concerned and you're worried and you say, hey, we can't move into MDR yet, we see something going on like a 0-day, we're absolutely concerned we're compromised, can you guys come in and check and see if we've actually been breached or not? We have the ability to get this done for you guys. So I did want to at least make sure you understand where we're heading and what we can do in our position here at Sophos. So I want to talk a little bit about the threat hunting logic. I know sometimes from a technical perspective, we don't want to go too deep into understanding the offering, but I really want to make sure you guys understand what we're doing from a threat hunting perspective. We recognize that as you look at these layers from the threat actors being outside of these attack surfaces, breaching the firewall, getting to the endpoint and accessing the data, this is really why threat hunting is critical, because we want to catch these layers in the, the kill chain, if you will, as early as possible. So our objective is, if we do these threat hunts proactively, we can really reduce our dwell time to catch risk. And how we run our threat hunts is a combination of two different approaches, behavioral and anomaly based. So behavioral is very easy for us to recognize. We know how threat actors think for the most part. We know what tools they use, and we know how they can manipulate to get through. So when we talk about abusing things like PowerShell, very trusted tool by a lot of admins, unfortunately, these threat actors will leverage PowerShell in concurrence with other techniques like PS Kill, which is a process killing tool, PS Exec, process execution tool, IP config, looking for IP information so they can remotely access a host through remote desktop. We know how they act and behave. So we get to go out and run threat hunts where we can look for all of these different steps or techniques or tools that are being used, and it helps us identify or bubble up maybe a threat actor did steal some credentials and they've been living on the land for 3 or 4 days. They're trying to be sneaky. We saw some behavior that normally admins don't do. Maybe we can catch some risk. In the anomaly base, this is more or less looking for the things that are a lot of times less frequent. So when we look at anomalies in the world, think of the 0 days where maybe something just popped up out of the blue. Threat actors are abusing execution, they're abusing access, they're exploiting this vulnerability. We have to go out and look for these rogue anomalies, these things that traditionally aren't happening every day unless something gets compromised or a vendor gets abused and their access is given to threat actors. So we wanted to cover both spectrums, the things that we know and the things that we've never seen before. This is where these two types of threat hunts give us success. And at the end of the day, it all starts with us taking a shot and proposing these hypotheses. So I talked about labs collecting information from hundreds of thousands of customers. They pull in all of this information and maybe they get a hunch and say something looks rogue. Let's go do a threat hunt on it. Maybe our threat hunters are just out in the world and they're on a forum like Twitter, one of the best threat intelligence resources, and they see somebody say, hey, I'm concerned about this. This could be big. They go grab those indicators and they get a hunch and they say, let's run with this and check. So you build out that hypothesis first, and then you go out and acquire the data. So for us, our endpoint agent is already capturing a large amount of information, and we have the ability with our XDR tool at any given time to work with our engineering team and say, we need to go see if any customers have these hashes or these IPs, or they're running this particular set of parent and child processes. Build a query or build the detection engine and let's capture it. And within minutes, they can customize these queries to capture that data, and then our SOC team gets to create cases and analyze it. And if it's legitimate, then we go through and validate that the threat's true, and we respond to it, and then we immediately follow up with our detection model getting enhanced. So things like Hafnium last year, where I would say countless people running Exchange on-prem, they had web shells, which is just remote access via an ASPX file. We were able to, in real time, actually capture these ASPX files and create a detection for our endpoint agent to block them as soon as that 0-day launched. So web shells, we were actually recognizing the activity prior, but we didn't realize it was associated with the 0-day until Microsoft actually published it. Once they did and we realized this was legitimate and this is a true threat, we were immediately creating detections to ensure that it gets blocked automatically. But our SOC team was jumping in and killing all of the web shells and responding in real time. So when we talk about hypotheses, it's so important to be able to take a risk and take a guess. I tell a lot of people, our MDR customers are the guinea pigs for threats out there, and it's the best thing to be as a guinea pig for the SOC, because you have this SOC team going out and checking you for any and every possible risk. And when they find it, they immediately coordinate with the DataVox team to ensure that it's getting responded to. Now, I talked about incident response, and this is a very important piece because I know a lot of us potentially are in a world where these frameworks that I'm pulling up are very relevant. So when we talk about NIST and we talk about SANS, these frameworks for incident response, a lot of teams and insurance companies are actually mapping to what they state is containment, eradication, and recovery, you'll actually see these steps across both NIST and SANS: containment, eradication, and recovery. And it's absolutely critical as you work through and you follow this process flow, you manage it within these frameworks, because this is the best and most successful way to actually respond to risk. So when you look at the first step, which is actually identification, if you will, this is how we kind of map MDR to these frameworks. Is number one, we have to identify risk. So the first step is obviously being able to not only collect valuable and relevant data, but we have to have tools in place to identify greater risk, whether that's ingesting firewall data from a third-party tool, whether that's using a Sophos tool to send the data, getting email data, Microsoft 365 data. The more information that is sent to a SOC team, the greater chance they have to identify risk. And if risk is found, then moving into a containment phase is so critical. That's the next step. And containment, a lot of people think when I say contain, I mean isolate. I want to add some context here. There are thousands of MDR vendors out in the world, and a majority of them don't have the benefit that we do at Sophos, which is we own our own antivirus tool. So many MDRs out in the world, they have to rely on device isolation, because more or less they're just deploying like a data sensor to capture the information. It doesn't give them a level of access to go out and respond. So containment, you'll see a lot of MDRs speak to 15 minutes mean time to respond. 15 minutes we're going to respond to threats. I would say probably 95% plus of that response is isolating a device and then sending it an escalation email to your team saying, here's what we found, you need to go out and validate this and respond. Because we have our own endpoint agent, not only can we isolate a device when necessary, we typically wait to isolate until we've confirmed that there's a true unauthorized access on the box. A lot of times people just go into a phishing email, download a file, and maybe it sits for a day or two before actually doing a callback to a command and control. We see it, we can go out and respond to that threat. That might not necessarily yield an isolation or an active incident. So in those instances, maybe we have to get rid of that artifact. Maybe we have to kill a process that was being triggered automatically via a scheduled task. So we have to go in and remove that scheduled task and clean up the registry keys. This level of threat response, when we talk about containment, it also includes disruption and prevention of spread. So yes, we can isolate the box, but we don't want to default to that. We want to go in and truly disrupt the threat actor if there any presence of them, and in all intents and purposes, prevent them from spreading to other machines. Now, if there is in fact a true unauthorized access, then we talk about neutralization efforts. So this is where you start the process of incident response, building a true root cause, understanding not only the patient zero, but truly identifying where it's spread, building a full timeline of events. So going back and saying, when did this actually start? At what point did they reveal themselves truly, where we recognized this was an active incident? At what point did we realize that this patient zero was actually exhibiting signs of maybe a ransomware attack, where they're starting to deploy tools that could be leveraged for encryption or zipping of the files. So the neutralization efforts are capturing all of the intelligence and kicking that threat actor out. And then remediation and recovery involves, there are other tools in your world that also might need to be responded to. Let's create valid context and guidance on what needs to be done. We understand that if our team works with the DataVox squad on a Saturday at 3 in the morning to respond to risk, you and your team might not get back into the office until a Monday to maybe implement a response on a firewall. So our objective is, at a minimum, provide absolute coverage on any endpoint and server possible to protect your critical data. And then as we move into a remediation phase, our objective is, we've neutralized the threat and we've kicked them out. Now let's make sure they don't get back in. So deploy MFA if it hasn't been, close any ports or block any IPs on your firewalls. Do what you have to do to restrict the attack surface while we're protecting you from ensuring that they don't come back and try again. And then once we all coordinate, we get on the same page, this is where obviously we finalize that approach. So as we talked about threat response earlier and incident response, I hope this paints a better picture of what that level of IR can truly bring. It is that soup to nuts. We want to help you guys from start to finish manage and work with the DataVox team to provide any guidance possible on where there might be lingering risk and completely prevent it from happening again. So that is our entire goal. Now, I wanted to loop back a couple of things because we've talked about integrations. I want to tie off with a bow a little bit why these are valuable. And obviously, you know, for everyone who's familiar with the firewall, if you're not, this is obviously your management of access north and south, if you will. So things can come in and things can leave, and you get to decide what those things are. Our objective is, and we have a couple of scenarios here, you know, in all reality, if we see on an endpoint that a scheduled task is being modified, that does not mean 100% that there is risk involved. But if we have a firewall sending telemetry and that firewall has reported from that same machine that there is a artifact that is now beaconing and doing a callback saying, send me a malicious payload, I'm ready for it, and we see that maybe a URL was clicked by that end user on that box and it now connected to a dangerous URL, creates better context right away. We can clearly understand there might be something else going on. So in all reality, if that scheduled task was modified and you weren't sending firewall data, eventually our team collecting the intelligence that they need would capture it. But 100%, if you're sending more telemetry, gives us a much greater chance of identifying risk as early in the kill chain as possible. And we want to be able to see these beaconings. We want to see these malicious URLs being clicked. It's a huge value add. When we talk about identity, working on our incident response team here at Sophos, one of the biggest things that I've seen is phishing emails and stolen credentials probably make up upwards of 70% of all of the 500 engagements that we've had. So this is a very important thing. If you guys don't have any type of MFA solution deployed, I would heavily urge you to reach out to the DataVox team and let them know you're ready. If insurance hasn't already pushed you that direction, it might be time, but multi-factor and monitoring your users' activity is hugely beneficial. Especially when we talk about like impossible travel. So in all reality, and we've had multiple experiences here where we've had customers send us Duo or Okta data and their end users have got a prompt from some, you know, format saying, hey, we saw you sign in, go ahead and authorize this your MFA attempt. They said, I didn't sign into anything, hit the reject button. And then we actually collected that data and their Duo tool let us know that someone was logging in with their creds and it was unauthorized. And we were able to go out and actually capture customers in the United States having their username and password abused in the Netherlands. This was a real example of a customer who had his information being used by a threat actor in the Netherlands, and our end users luckily were hitting reject. We were able to jump in right away and let this customer know there is somebody with access to credentials. And we did a full threat hunt on all of their machines to look for any abusive creds. We monitored every process to verify this. And we worked with that customer in real time to get those IP addresses blocked on their firewall and get their users' passwords reset immediately before there was greater risk. And this is exactly what we want to collect because this is a big problem. This and email are the two easiest ways for threat actors to get in because they target the end user who is not security minded, and they will fall for these attempts. So when we talk about email, I love this scenario up top because this actually incorporates both, where we can see that abnormal login in Microsoft 365 via the identity integration. We can see email forwarding rules being created to internal and external accounts. We can see phishing attempts, and we can see file downloads. We've got endpoint data, email data, identity data, and we can paint a very clean picture that a successful phishing attempt allowed unauthorized access via an illicit file download that was then being pushed out to other users externally. And this is important for us to stop. We want to identify this risk, and we want to help manage this. We know that managing email and identity tools are very, very challenging. We have integrations into the public cloud now, so a lot of people are starting to jump into things like AWS, maybe Azure for Active Directory. So being able to see new users created, EC2 instances getting spun up. We're actually putting a lot of focus now on our public cloud integrations because we understand this is becoming a bigger priority for a lot of businesses. It just can help save a lot of money and it can offload a lot of burden and management. So our tie-in to the public cloud has been getting greater. And then the network piece, is something that's very important to us now. So we have the ability to tie in to quite a few network detection and response vendors that are out there. We also know that from a network detection and response perspective, a lot of times the budget and the maturity just isn't there yet. And we wanted to ensure that we could provide some context and some access to some really cool tools. I know that the DataVox team, I'm sure you guys have already started leveraging this NDR to a capacity here, but we actually launched our own network detection and response where we can place an appliance inside of your world and have these critical 5 engines help us identify as much potential risk as possible. Really quickly to go over these engines and make sure they make sense, the device detection analytics helps us find all unmanaged devices. So very cleanly, if you have a printer, a cell phone, a tablet, bring your own laptop that came in and Bob brought in his laptop and his kid was just riddling it with BitTorrent downloads, getting movies and music, and every threat actor decided to jump on board on that machine. We want to identify all of these unmanaged devices. The deep packet inspection and the encrypted payload analytics actually help us go through a very sophisticated packet scrubbing technique, if you will. So you're going to have your switching or your routing, and you're going to place this NDR on that switch or router, set up a span port, and just mirror the traffic. So whatever you see in your world, you let us see it as well. And what we do is we actually get to apply this deep learning that lets us look for the things that we already know are bad against the unencrypted traffic in your world. But the biggest struggle is identifying things that are encrypted, because most of us don't decrypt traffic. And David, I might bounce this off of you. And what size of your customer base are you really doing like man-in-the-middle decryption for their traffic? It just slows things down too much. And I see your head shaking. No, it just doesn't happen very often. And for us, we wanted to be able to see and identify risk inside of an encrypted packet without reducing your performance or your speed and without impacting your business. So what we did is we basically pulled in this tool that lets us build a neural network of identified risk. We actually pull packet header information from the packets that are moving down the wire. So source IP, MAC address, destination IP, MAC address. We want to look at the protocol that's being sent. So is it TCP IP? What's going on there? We want to look at all of the flags and the headers that are being signed to this particular packet. We want to look at the size that's being sent. We want to look at the duration of the communication. So were they sending 80 gigs in a matter of 5 seconds, or were they attempting to send this 5 gig file over the course of 8 hours, and they were just lengthening and slowing the transfer of the packet to maybe obfuscate it so you can't see it? We take into account all this information and apply legitimate logic against that traffic. So we don't have to decrypt it and see what's inside, but we can actually identify with a very high degree of certainty what's going on. In this example, a customer was actually sending us data from their network, and we saw over here in this cluster context 4 key categories. We saw the source IP and the destination IP, and we saw the application protocol being used along with the destination port. It was a random port that was not logical for that data transfer, and the application protocol that they were leveraging, they were basically using a protocol that was not traditionally used as well. That raised some flags for us. We ended up applying logic to the packet, and we saw an 85.7% certainty that somebody was trying to send Cobalt Strike, which, if you're not familiar with Cobalt Strike, it's just a trusted penetration testing tool that gets abused by threat actors all the time. We saw that Cobalt Strike packet was landing on an unmanaged device inside of their network. So this end user was sending us data on their network, and we were able to see an unmanaged device with a malicious payload being delivered to it. And once we worked with them, they did verify this was not legitimate. They blocked that IP address right away, and they went and did a review, made sure MDR was deployed to all of their assets, and we did a double check to make sure that there were no signs of Cobalt Strike on any machines that could have possibly had it placed before. And this is just a very simple and clean way of how us monitoring that east and west traffic. So your firewall typically watches the north and south, all the things coming in and leaving. Let us watch all the things that happen inside, all of the devices that are doing intercommunication between each other. This is where we get to shine so well. And it's just another layer, another piece that you get to add. I want to close this out talking about one of the coolest things that we offer that I think is super helpful for a lot of people that the DataVox team works with, and that's our breach warranty now. So any Sophos MDR Complete customer that goes with DataVox and their MIT core offering, they will have access to the breach warranty. It is a self-funded warranty through Sophos as well. So if you deploy our tools and you maintain a healthy status and something happens along the way where we fail to do our job and you do have a successful ransomware attack, we want to be able to provide supplemental coverage up to $1 million. So we want to be able to cover up to $1,000 per machine. We do $100,000 based off of the devices and the ransom, and then we do money allocation for PR and legal. So anything that you need to do from a compliance perspective or a breach notification for your customers, we have allotment to cover those areas. I'm going to be completely candid with everybody on this call. When you go with Sophos' MDR Complete solution, our goal is you never have to use the warranty. But I can tell you this much, it makes insurance companies very, very happy. It makes senior leadership very, very happy in your business. And it's really a matter of knowing we were willing to back up and kind of put our money where our mouth is. Because this is self-funded, we're not relying on other people to help us. So this is us knowing we trust our MDR solution and we want to partner with DataVox and ensure that they can provide you with a very comprehensive MDR and provide you with a breach warranty that can check a lot of boxes for insurance, potentially even reduce premiums and get everybody on the same page of success. So David, I know we covered most of the information. Hopefully I stuck within my time limit, but I know, we've got about 9 minutes or so left. So maybe this would be a perfect time to address any questions that might have popped up and do just a general Q&A.
That sounds good, John. Great job. A lot of great information there. We do have a couple of questions coming in. If you haven't already, please feel free to send us a question through the Q&A section here. But first question here from Mark is, it's a little bit of a big question, but what's the difference between a SIM and MDR?
Yeah, so
we can handle that in a couple of minutes.
There are a lot of MDRs that leverage a SIM. I'll say it that much. But when you think of MDR, which is managed detection and response, the goal is to detect threats and help respond to them. Most of the market that is an MDR service offering leverages a SIM because it's the best and quickest and easiest way to stand up a SOC team with 10 people and say, hey, we're going to have this SIM, this information and event management tool. We're going to have our customers send data to this SIM, and then we're going to rely on this tool to help us find the problems that are inside of the environment. The challenge is if a vendor like a Palo Alto or a Cisco changes their detection rule set on their firewall tomorrow and they completely augment the tool and you have all new detection naming conventions. A SIM is a lot of times not going to be able to respond to risk because they don't know that detection, so they can't score it, they can't apply logic to it. And a lot of times it takes a while for a SIM to update their rules. Where we own our own tool, so we actually have a team that will sit there and say, we've never seen that detection before, we've never seen that information before, we are going to build our own logic and put it back out in the pipeline so the next time that detection comes in, we already know exactly how to score it and escalate it if needed. When you ask what's the difference between a SIM and an MDR, in all reality, SIMs are more or less, you have to manage them yourselves unless you go with a managed SIM, but there's still the onus that a managed SIM cannot respond to threats unless you introduce a SOAR, which is an orchestration tool. And now you're building playbooks for every single scenario under the sun. And a 0-day might pop up tomorrow and you don't have a playbook written for it. And now you have this SIM that's collecting information and you have this SOAR that's supposed to respond, but it didn't do its job because you didn't have the playbook built. And it puts a lot of burden and onus on security teams to manage and run their own SIMs. We kind of reinvented the wheel a little bit. We still want to use the concept of a SIM, but we didn't want to act like a SIM because we felt that SIMs are slow and they're clunky and they have to be tuned. When you use our tools, they can be deployed and start working immediately. And we hot fix them and we manage them and we update them because they're our tools and our logic. So I hope that helped a little bit, and we could potentially have a greater conversation on that one later because there's a lot of information involved in that topic.
I think that was great, John. Thanks. A question here from Daniel. I have a Sophos XGS firewall. Is that?
Yep.
How does that help?
Yeah, helps a lot. So number one, if you go with the Sophos MDR, your XGS will automatically start sending telemetry to the SOC for inspection at no additional cost. So you're paying for your XGS. If you onboard to the MDR platform, automatic data collection sent to the SOC. Another really big benefit is, let's say that our team does an investigation. That we have a case opened up, we see there was some illicit command and control communication happening, and we identify that there's a true external IP that's malicious. Because you own our firewall and it's our tool set, we can immediately send that information to our labs team and our detection engineering team, and they can block those IP addresses globally for you and send that directly to your firewall. So if you used a third-party firewall, traditionally speaking, we would be coordinating with your team and saying, hey, go block this to reduce the attack surface. When you own the XGS, we automatically block it and reduce the attack surface for you. So it does make a very clean relationship for how we can respond. And we're only getting better with our response capabilities as we continue to grow out our third-party telemetry.
Sounds good. A couple more questions. I think we'll be out of time, John, but you mentioned the $1 million warranty. Does that apply just to ransomware?
So it has to be a successful ransomware attack. So we here understand and have realized at Sophos that there is no true way to stop a breach, because there is never a true way to stop Bob in marketing from giving away his credentials and letting a threat actor illicitly access an estate. There have been some vendors out there that say we've never been breached, we've never been breached. I would challenge that, because I don't think they truly understand what a breach is. For me, a breach is somebody accessing something they shouldn't, and that happens every day with people, whether they own MDR or not. You will be breached at some point. We have to recognize that. So our logic for the warranty is we want to ensure that we can identify if someone did get in, and we can action it with our incident response and prevent disaster from happening. But if for some reason we do not prevent that disaster, we want to make sure we're there to financially reimburse you for the damages that could occur because of that. So that's why the warranty is there, is basically to say we trust our solution so much to capture before disaster happens. Just in case it does, we're there for you.
Got it. And one other question here, you mentioned remediation a lot. How far do you take remediation, and do we have to authorize it?
Yeah, so you actually get to choose. You'll have response modes, collaboration, or authorized. So you let us know, and you coordinate with the DataVox team to let them know how far you want us as a vendor to go. In all reality, if you don't want us to touch a thing, you put us in collaborate mode, and anytime we see anything that is true, legitimate risk, we reach out via an escalation email and or a phone call saying, here's what we found, here's what we recommend you do, and let us know when it's done, and we'll go ahead and close the case. Inversely, if you want to authorize us, how we do remediation is our endpoint agent or our XDR sensor gives us remote shell access to command line or root access to Mac or Linux. So if there is ever a need for us to respond, we can open up a command line interface and go immediately remove an artifact from a directory, or we can immediately kill a process in real time. If there's a matter of trust to be built, I always tell people start and collaborate, build trust with us as a SOC. And once you see what we're doing and why we're here, we typically see most of our customers moving to authorize after a couple of months, because they realize, hey, these guys are actually here to help protect me. They're not here to do things that they shouldn't. So if you ever want to build your relationship with us, we give you options and levels that you get to designate on how far we can go. But we're here to go as far down the rabbit hole as possible of response to make sure these threat actors don't ever have success in accessing your data.
That's great. Maybe the last question here. This is maybe a little bit too a big question for the last one, but
we'll condense it.
What are the top 2 things I should look for when evaluating an MDR solution? Hopefully, I think we covered those.
Yeah.
Maybe just top 2.
I would say without question, number one, when you're evaluating an MDR, it's important to understand the relationship you want with your MDR. So a lot of people have to go through this and say, what am I expecting my MDR to do? What am I expecting them to look at and monitor for me? And what is their level of engagement when I need them to be around? So that involves threat response, that involves incident response, and that involves third-party telemetry collection. I would say if you're looking at any MDR, you need to know how they can collect their data, how they use it, and are they going to be there for you when it hits the fan and you are in the trenches trying to fight off a threat actor? Do you want someone who's just sending you guidance in an email, or do you want someone who's containing and then you have to go and fix the problem, or do you want someone that does everything from start to finish, and you don't get another bill at the end of it saying, hey, in order for us to help with incident response, here's a $300 an hour service that you have to use until it's entirely cleaned up. So I would say those are the three most important. I know you asked for two, but those are the three. Third-party telemetry capabilities, hands-on keyboard, true remediation, and active incident response. If those three are present, I think it makes a great relationship, but understanding how they work together, those are the things that I would say you should look at the most.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Well, those were definitely three of the main reasons that we chose Sophos MDR. So appreciate your time today. And for those of you who have other questions submitted, we will respond to those after this webinar, but we're right on time. So thank you very much, Sean, Charles, and look forward to seeing you the next time.
Perfect, team.
Good day, guys.
Have a good one. It was a pleasure.